lesson you learned last week about selfishness, we hope that you practice that. We hope that you put others before yourselves. But boys and girls, we hope that that decision didn't just last for last week, but that you'll carry on this week. And you will try to continually put others before yourself. That's what Jesus did, boys and girls. And we ought to be modeling our life after Jesus. He put others before himself. Well, boys and girls, we talked about Abraham, and we talked about how his name was Abram, and then God made a covenant with him, and his name changed to Abraham. So that kind of happens between last week's story and this week's story, that his name changes from Abram to Abraham. So now we're going to be calling him Abraham, even though last week he was Abram. Well, God had made a promise to Abraham. He had Abraham go out one night, and he had him look up into the stars. And he told him, he said, Abraham, you see all of those stars up there? I'm going to make you the father of many, many generations that would be like those stars. And they looked at those stars, and Abraham's like, wow. What, you boys and girls, you ever been out at night and just looked at the stars? I mean, there's not just 5 or 10. Now, if there's a cloudy night, you can't see them, but it doesn't change that they're there. There are lots and lots and lots of stars. And God had promised Abraham that he would have a child, and that child would have children, and they would multiply and have many, many generations. Well, Abraham's getting up there in years, and I mean, some of you old can be relative, and you probably think that me at the age of 34 is getting a little old. Yeah, okay, whatever, Peter. I'll have to take care of Peter later. 34 is not old, boys and girls, but apparently in Peter's world, 34 is old. Peter. But, yeah, Peter's just smiling away over here. Yeah, I'm 34. Abraham was not. Abraham, boys and girls, do you want to guess how old Abraham is? How old do you think Abraham is, Peter? 335. You think? Yeah, real funny. No, Abraham's not 35. Wow, Peter. Old, 55. No, older. 75. Older. Boys and girls, Abraham at this time is 100 years old. 100 years old. Now, I don't know if you figured this out or not, but usually people don't have babies at 100 years old, okay? So Sarah was 90, his wife, and he was 100, and they know God made this promise, and Abraham has been unselfish, and Abraham has followed God, but he's getting a little old to be having a baby, or his wife to be having a baby. So Abraham's sitting in his tent door one day. He's sitting there, it's hot outside. And he's just sitting there, and Sarah's working away inside the tent, and he looks. There's some people on their way. He sees these 3 figures who are coming, who are on their way to visit. And Abraham gets up, and he goes to greet them, and he tells them to come, and he says, oh, you must have been walking a long way. And their feet, they wore sandals. Their feet were probably quite dirty. And Abraham invites them to come and sit down. He says, let me get some water. Let's wash your feet. And they wash their feet, and they take a rest. And he's thinking, wow, you've been traveling in this hot weather. You need to take a break. Well, Abraham calls back into the tent, and he tells Sarah, he says, Sarah, we've got to prepare a meal. We've got some visitors. They're hungry. We've got to prepare some food for them. So Sarah starts to make food. She's back in the tent there. Boys and girls, I'm in Genesis chapter 18 this morning. I'm going to start here in verse number 4. It says, let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. So he tells them, you rest under the tree, wash your feet with this water. Verse 5, and I will fetch a morsel of bread and comfort ye your hearts. After that ye shall pass on. For therefore are ye come to your servant. And they said, so do as thou hast said. Verse 6, and Abraham hastened, that means he went fast, into the tent unto Sarah and said, make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. And Abraham ran unto the herd, and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man, and he has dressed it. Boys and girls, it goes on to explain all the food that they got ready. But it's not like you or I who can just go to the fridge, pull something out, pop it in the microwave, and have it in about 5 minutes. If you notice there, it says he went out to the herd and got a calf. He went out and got the animal. They would have had to butcher it, kill it, all of that stuff. This was going to take a while. This wasn't a 5-minute meal prep or even a 20-minute meal prep. This was going to take a while. But he wanted to treat these visitors well. He wanted to treat them right. Well, these visitors who came, one of them had a message. It says in verse 13, and not before that, it tells us that they told him that they were going to have a baby. Well, Sarah, who's back inside the tent, do you know what she does? She laughs. Can you believe that, boys and girls? She knew God's promise, but when she's told God's going to fulfill her promise, she laughs. Yes, it's sad, isn't it, Peter? She didn't trust God. She thought it was funny, so she laughed. Oh, boys and girls, we don't ever want to laugh at something that God has made a promise to us about. We want to take that with seriousness. Well, if we look at verse 13 in Genesis chapter 18, it says, and the Lord said unto Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of a surety bear a child which am old? Verse 14, is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. So, the Lord says, why'd Sarah laugh? I made a promise. Does she doubt? Is anything too hard for God, Peter? No, nothing is too hard for God. If God has said he will do it, he will. Nothing is too hard for God, boys and girls. There are some things in life that are too hard for us. Some of you struggle with math, and that seems too hard for you. Some of you struggle with reading comprehension. You can read the words, but you don't really remember what's said. Some of you struggle in choir with musical things. Some of you struggle to make friends or different struggles that you might have. Some of you may have a speech struggle. But you know what, boys and girls? You and I might struggle. There are things that are too hard for us to do. There are things that are too heavy for me to pick up. I don't know, Peter's pretty strong here, but there's probably a few things too hard for Peter to get. There's definitely a few things too high for Peter and I to both reach. There are things that are impossible for us, but there is nothing impossible for God. Nothing too hard for God. Even if God is going to have a 90-year-old lady have a baby, that was not impossible. But Sarah thought it was, so she laughed. So then the messengers say, wait, Sarah laughed. We heard it. Verse 15, then Sarah denied. What does denied mean, Peter? Yeah, she said, I didn't see that, I didn't see that. You ever been caught, boys and girls, and you're like, no, wasn't me. Because you don't want to get in trouble, because you're afraid of what might happen if you admit it. Well, Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. And he said, nay, but thou didst laugh. They said, you know what, Sarah, you did laugh. You're denying it because you're afraid, but you did laugh. You are guilty. Boys and girls, you might be struggling with something right now. Maybe you have a family member who's not healthy, and there's nothing you can do about it, boys and girls. I recently had a friend who was pretty sick, and it was kind of a helpless feeling to feel like I couldn't do anything for her. I couldn't help, or it felt like I couldn't help her in any way because there was nothing I could do to make her feel better. But you know what, boys and girls, you know what I could do? I could pray. And I did. I prayed a lot that she would feel better. You know what? You can do that, boys and girls. There are things in your life that seem impossible, that you can't do, that you can't fix. But boys and girls, God can. There is nothing that's too hard for God. Just like we learned with Abraham and Sarah, there's nothing too hard for God. I hope, boys and girls, that this week you'll take those things that you think are too hard for God and or too hard for you, and ask God to help you with those things. Whether it's something like a math test and you're struggling with long division, or it's that grandma's sick, or it's that you can't see somebody that you really want to see, or your plans got changed or canceled. Take them to God, boys and girls. Nothing is too hard for God. Peter and I love you, boys and girls. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. Make sure you're not